Property giant Lendlease abandons its international strategy in an attempt to resurrect the one-time blue chip. Australia would be among the biggest losers if a trade war erupts between China and the US. And women are abandoning dating apps, causing a bit of a headache for the owners of the apps. Welcome to Fear and Greed Daily Business News for people who make their own decisions. It is Tuesday, the 28th of May, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, I'll mention our interview in a moment, but let's get straight to the main story this morning. Property giant Lendlease will write down nearly $1.5 billion in investments in its overseas construction and development business and unwind its international strategy to focus on growth here at home.
It will be all about the Australian business and its international investment platform, but not its international construction and development business. For many years, Lendlease has been trying to make it overseas, but as demonstrated by its share price tumbling in recent months to about a quarter of its pre-COVID high, Chief Executive Tony Lombardo has been forced to change strategy. Lendlease's international work includes unfinished developments in Malaysia, the US, Italy and the UK. Mostly they were started when interest rates were low and property prices high. As the cycle turned, Lendlease was stuck with unprofitable or hard-to-fund developments. The company has already sold down its stake in a military housing scheme in the US. Also, its master planned communities business, it sold that to Stockland late last year for $1.3 billion. That was here in Australia. Mr. Lombardo yesterday said the new strategy will be less complex and Lendlease will be more fit for purpose. It's targeting $125 million in annual savings within 12 months and intends to return about $500 million to shareholders through an on-market share buyback. Its share price, as a result of this, jumped nearly 8% yesterday.
Sean, we now have two companies that have been kind of considered blue chip, Lendlease and BHP, taking very different tacks on overseas expansion. BHP, which remains a blue chip, is full steam ahead. Lendlease is the opposite.
Yeah, so in recent years, the track record around Aussie companies buying overseas assets is mixed at best, shall we say. Now, often these big deals take many years to play out, so we probably don't really know the results. One case in point is CSL. It spent $17 billion buying Swiss-based Vifor Pharmacy almost 2 years ago. It pushed into iron deficiency in kidney products. Now, that deal really hasn't paid dividends yet. In fact, it's probably gone the other way, though I'm sure CSL would say, well, yeah, but, give us some time and it will pay dividends. The big banks have tried to go global, notably ANZ a few years back wanted to become an Asian bank. That hasn't really worked and mostly they've been selling offshore assets in more recent times. Goodman Group has tended to favour partnerships with offshore players, bit of a different strategy. WiseTech Global's been a serial acquirer, and given its share price is up 30% over the past year, 300% over 5 years, it must be doing something right. QBE is another organisation which was a big acquirer, though it has pulled back now. Another really interesting one is actually Domino's Pizza. It's a long way from the best performing company on the exchange. In fact, it's down more than 20% over the past year, but it has done a good job expanding into Japan and Europe. Now, BHP is the monster of the Aussie acquirers. It operates in North and South America, Southern Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. It is probably the exception to the rule in that it has generally been able to acquire businesses over many years and make them work. But really, most Australian companies haven't got a great track record of doing that.
And Sean, that brings me very neatly to our interview for today to mention what you've got coming up after the show. Back in 2020, you conducted an interview, and it's a fascinating interview, this one, with Don Meij, the CEO of Domino's. And you were just talking about Domino's, and Don was actually in quarantine when you spoke to him. This is a great chat.
Yeah, it sure is. We talk about the history of Domino's and his own personal history and how he ended up in this role he is in. The value equation with making a pizza, it sounds easy, but the need for speed is everything. And the idea is if you can get someone's pizza to the front door really quickly and hot, then you've got a much, much better business. We also talk about international expansion, and Domino's has aggressively pushed into places like Japan and Germany and France and Luxembourg, the Netherlands. And we talked to Don about why they've done that and the potential for the future. Now, it was a couple of years ago, so things have changed for Domino's, but it's a really interesting look into Don Meij's mindset.
Yeah, it certainly is. It is well worth a listen. It's a great one. It's coming up after the show. So I'm going to say, look, Sean, even though this is a bit of a snapshot, this is out of the Fear and Greed vault, it's a must listen.
Oh, it's a must listen. I'm with you.
It's unanimous. Now, local markets. How did they go yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up almost 1% yesterday to 7,780 points, with about three-quarters of the stocks ending higher. The property companies led the way, with Goodman Group jumping 2.3%. Telcos also did well. Telstra was also up 2.3%. Retailers performed pretty strongly, while the energy stocks were the laggards. Among the large caps, BHP, Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, Wesfarmers, Woolies, Coles, ResMed and Xero all jumped more than 1%. Fortescue Metals was the worst performer of the large caps. It was down over 1%, while Woodside, Rio, Aristocrat Leisure and CSL all went backwards. In corporate news, Australian Vintage, the owner of wine brands McGuigan and Tempest 2, is pursuing a capital raise after larger rival Accolade Wines temporarily ended merger talks. It was in a trading halt yesterday. Online luxury platform Setai jumped nearly 11% after it rejected allegations in the media that customers purchased counterfeit products from its site. Neuren Pharmaceuticals rallied 16% after revealing positive trial results for its proposed treatment of Pitt-Hopkins syndrome. And Megaport chair Bevan Slattery has sold about $16 million worth of shares in the tech company he founded. The stock price fell about 2.5% yesterday. And just before we leave markets, it's not listed, but bonds administrators have won 2 more months to try and find a buyer for the budget carrier after the federal court granted an application for the extension.
It's quite an exciting day overall, really, in corporate news.
Yeah.
When you think about it, you've got wine and luxury kind of fashion and biotech companies.
Airlines, we can throw in that. Yeah, definitely.
Goodness me. God, I sound old, don't I?
You do, sometimes.
Goodness me.
Goodness
My
me.
word, Sean, this is exciting. International markets, what's happening?
Oil prices are close to 3-month lows. Brent crude's trading around $82 a barrel as OPEC Plus meet on supply arrangements. Gold is trading around $23.40 an ounce. Copper prices remain elevated, not quite as high as they were a week or two ago, but they're still pretty high. Cryptocurrencies are rising, particularly Ether, after the news that it is a step closer to being included in ETFs after a green light or a partial green light from the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US. And the Aussie dollar is buying 66.4 US cents. Also worth a mention, the European Central Bank is on track to start cutting interest rates next month, but it will need to keep policy in restrictive territory through 2024. That's according to the ECB chief economist Philip Lane. Interesting, the idea that they can cut rates, although they still will remain relatively high, which is probably exactly the same as Australia and the US.
All right, we've got a lot to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Australia would be among the biggest losers if a trade war between the US and its allies and China escalated, according to the OECD.
The OECD says Australia's economic output would fall by $30 billion if there was a 10% reduction in bilateral goods and services trade flows between major economies. Only South Korea would be worse off. Now, the ranking reflects Australia's heavy dependence on China to buy commodities. About 80% of our mining exports actually go to China. Also, Australians buy billions of dollars worth of Chinese manufactured goods every year. The warning from the OECD comes as US presidential candidates Joe Biden and Donald Trump ramp up the rhetoric against China. They've also talked about, or Joe Biden has done, Donald Trump's spoken about imposing tariffs and bans on products from electric vehicles to technology. Another area of susceptibility for Australia, at least, is the education sector. Now, that recently hit an all-time high value of $48 billion, a major exporter.
And on that topic, Sean, Chinese Premier Li Qiang is likely to raise Labor's crackdown on foreign students in high-level talks with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese next month.
It's the first visit to Australia by a Chinese political leader in 7 years. Mr. Li is expected to arrive in Canberra on June 17. Now, almost 24 Chinese university chiefs will arrive in Australia this week in a precursor to Mr. Li's visit. International education is Australia's 4th biggest export industry. There are more than 148,000 Chinese students studying here, the largest cohort, about 22% of the total foreign students. Both the government and the opposition has been talking about cutting those numbers. So no doubt that will be high on the agenda for the talks between Mr. Li and Mr. Albanese.
Now, Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles said Friday's landslide in Papua New Guinea's highlands is an absolute tragedy, and the Australian government will provide assistance to local authorities as the search and rescue efforts progress. Sean, the scale of this is truly awful.
Yeah, it sure is. Mr. Miles told Radio National that Australia could provide airlift capabilities to rescuers who are navigating a remote and rugged environment and the danger of further landslides. More than 670 people have died in the landslide and more than 1,250 have been displaced, the International Organisation for Migration said over the weekend. Around 150 houses and their residents in a village called Yambali at the foot of a mountain in remote Enga province are submerged. Now, hopes of finding survivors are fading. It is a real tragedy.
Yeah, certainly is. Now, Optus has failed in its efforts to keep secret a Deloitte report into the cause of a major cyber attack in 2022, meaning, Sean, that class action lawyers Slater and Gordon will get access to the document.
Yes, the decision of the full court of the federal court is a win for Slater and Gordon, the law firm pursuing a class action against Optus, alleging the company failed to protect its customers' personal information. The report won't be publicly released, though some of its content is likely to come out through the class action proceedings. Now, remember last week, the Australian Communications and Media Authority filed its own lawsuit that alleges Optus failed to protect the confidentiality of personally identifiable information of its customers. Optus is defending both the class action and the ACMA lawsuit.
Pathology group Helios will sell its Loomis imaging business, which analysts say could be worth $650 million.
Helios wants to focus on its core pathology business. It is the second largest in the country, running 2,000 collection centres and 100 testing laboratories. The Loomis business provides x-rays, ultrasounds, MRI, CT scans, mammograms, that type of thing. CEO Paul Anderson said after considering a range of options, a sale was agreed upon to reduce complexity in the company's operations. Now, shareholders have been very critical of the group's strategy for more than a year, with the group's share price going from nearly $5 2.5 years ago to around $1.32. In March, its CEO left after just 12 months in the job. The chair was ousted late last year. Hopefully this reset will help Helios and look after its long-suffering shareholders, Michael.
Do you reckon when they announced the sale of this company that does x-rays and things, they said it's just important to be transparent?
Yes. It was coming. Coming.
That was hard work to get to that just then, and I really don't think the result was worth it. Was it?
Possibly not.
No, I think the payoff wasn't there. Sean, we have to do this. The Star Entertainment story has yet another update, which is really just a regular feature now of the show, isn't it?
It is.
What's Star Entertainment done today? A consortium that put an informal proposal to the gaming group claims that it has a long-standing commercial relationship with Hard Rock International.
And it reckons it kept the Florida-based group in the loop on discussions. Last week, Hard Rock International said it had not had discussions with Star, nor has it licensed its name for any such discussions. But yesterday, two local companies said that they approached Star in March with a strategy to turn around its assets in New South Wales and Queensland. According to the Financial Review, the two companies said they had submitted an indicative non-binding proposal to acquire the Sydney assets and had held the right to use the Hard Rock brand across designated territories, including Australia, for more than 30 years. Who knows?
At what point does this now just cross into the farce?
Oh, we might be there.
Farcical territory. This is quite ridiculous, isn't it?
We might be there. I mean, 30 years. Maybe do they just like dusting off an old contract? Do you remember? It was in the early 90s. I'm sure we did some sort of deal.
We got that. Oh, you know what? Let's dust that one off.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I love that story, and the fact that it just keeps on going is really quite incredible.
I feel a bit sorry for the Star. I mean, last week we were very critical of the Star in the fact that they didn't do a due diligence on the Hard Rock International versus the other Hard Rock. But, I do feel a bit sorry for it.
Yeah, there may have actually been enough evidence for them to roll with that. So, you know what, Sean? I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings.
It'll bring something.
Oh,
guaranteed.
Of course. That's the only guarantee here. Turning to international news, leaders of South Korea, China and Japan met yesterday for their first trilateral meeting in more than 4 years as they seek to improve long, complicated relations that are key to regional peace.
No major breakthrough was expected during the gathering in Seoul, but just restarting the country's highest level annual meeting was a positive sign for cooperation among the three Northeast Asian neighbours. On the eve of the meeting, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida had rounds of bilateral meetings among themselves to discuss how to boost economic and other cooperation, according to Associated Press. Some more delicate subjects were also brought up, such as North Korea, Taiwan and the South China Sea.
Sean, aid trucks from Egypt entered the Gaza Strip yesterday, Australian time, under a new US brokered agreement to reopen a corridor for humanitarian relief.
Egypt had blocked aid from entering the enclave via its territory since Israel's seizure of the Rafah crossing, which provides access to southern Gaza, in early May. The two sides have traded blame over that crossing's closure, even as aid has piled up on the Egyptian side. Now, according to the New York Times, after US pressure, Egypt agreed to divert trucks through the Israeli-controlled Kerem Shalom crossing, which is roughly 3 kilometres from the Rafah crossing, as a temporary measure. Some 126 trucks from Egypt containing food, fuel and other necessities then entered the Gaza Strip. It comes as dozens of Palestinians are feared dead or wounded after Israeli strikes hit a camp for the displaced in northwestern Rafah.
And finally, Sean, dating apps such as Tinder and Bumble are exploring extra features and new branding to attract more Generation Z women in response to warnings that female users are suffering burnout on matchmaking platforms. Sean, I reckon that you and I could be the two least qualified people to talk about this, of course, neither of us are female, but also...
That's a start.
Yes, but I don't think either of us have ever actually used dating apps.
Oh, Michael, please. Details. All I know is that Match Group, which has more than 40 dating brands, which blew me away, including Tinder and Hinge, and Bumble, so Match and Bumble, have both been out there trying to boost content moderation and introduce other ways to improve women's experiences. Surveys have consistently shown a gender disparity among dating app users, according to the Financial Times. A recent poll by market research firm Mintel found that 47% of men aged between 18 and 34 in the UK had used a dating website or app in the year to December. Only 25% of women. Female millennials are most likely to use dating apps, while Gen Zers appear much, much more hesitant. Not helping, of course, is that some women have reported concerns about receiving unsolicited material and violent threats while using the services. The share prices of both Match Group and Bumble are now about 80% off their highs, and that's on the back of the slowdown in use, particularly among women. It just seems that peak dating app may have passed, Michael.
Sean.
It came and went, Michael, without you or I even trying it.
Ever even being part of it. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed daily interview. You are speaking today. You spoke with him nearly 4 years ago, but this is a great interview to revisit. Don May, CEO of Domino's Pizza Enterprises.
It's particularly relevant because today we're talking about companies who have expanded overseas. Domino's has done a great job pushing into parts of Asia and parts of Europe. So we talked to Don about that, but it's much broader than that. It's also about his story, the Domino's story, why getting a pizza to the front door hot is absolutely crucial to a successful business model at Domino's. It's a fascinating chat.
Yeah, it sure is. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also, Sean, where you can sign up for the Fear and Greed newsletter, which comes out tomorrow morning and is just going to have so many of your opinions and spicy takes on all of the big news stories of the week. Anything that you've got your eye on at the moment?
There's a bit around. Don't want to give away too much, which suggests I haven't done a lot of work on it yet, but
you haven't started it yet, have you? Sign up and you will get it baked fresh tomorrow morning, much like a Domino's pizza.
Much like a Domino's pizza, Michael.
There we go. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 28th of May, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.